Hello, and welcome to this G2O webinar on cybersecurity in space. My name is Cesar Carmona, and I work as Principal Technology Consultant at Novaspace, the leading consulting firm in the space sector. Today, we'll focus on one of the hottest topics in the space industry at the moment, cybersecurity. For decades, satellite systems were thought to be immune to cyber attacks. Resilience mechanisms, if any, address only a few mission-specific threats. Today, we know that satellite systems are also vulnerable to cyber attacks. From eavesdropping on SATCOM signals to distributed denial of service attacks, all the way through data leaks, data breaches, or data sales, we have today many examples showing us that it is crucial to design satellite missions with security at the core. We will talk about the threat landscape and the need of secure by design architectures. We will also talk about trusted computing and hardware root of trust. We will then move to securing SATCOM networks and to operational resilience. We'll also talk about securing the supply chain and about future-looking technologies such as AI, quantum, and automation. Before we jump into our discussion, just some facts on the cyber and electronic warfare threats affecting the space sector today. According to research from the Center for Security Studies of the ETH Zurich, 407 cyber attacks targeted companies or institutions in the space sector last year. Most of the attacks were DDoS, distributed denial of service, exploits on websites of defense and space companies. Exposed remote user interfaces of systems such as antenna control, network management, other kind of systems were also targeted by DDoS attacks. Other attacks, such as data leaks on the user and ground segments through vectors other than the user interface, were the second most common type of attacks. The space segment as such remain rarely targeted and even more rarely compromised, but this doesn't mean it's impossible. Electronic disruption of satellite signals happen pretty much on a daily basis. GNSS spoofing is common in conflict areas, such as the Balkan countries, Ukraine, or the Middle East, while most SATCOM waveforms are vulnerable to jamming and interference. As satellite systems become critical infrastructure, in particular in conflict scenarios, state actors invest heavily on offensive operations. In some cases, highly specialized teams are working for certain governments with the sole purpose to disrupt the enemy's critical infrastructure, such as space systems. There's a clear correlation between occurrences of cyber and electronic warfare attacks and conflict events, which shows the geopolitical interests of space. Satellite systems become more integrated with terrestrial networks and with one another. While space systems used to be isolated standalone systems, it is today common that they become part of hybrid space terrestrial infrastructure, multi-orbit, multi-operator, federated systems, cloud deployments, etc. All these increase the complexity of the systems and therefore the exposed attack surface. This slide will show now some examples of claims from hackers having gained access to information from military or dual-use space systems. So this is an attack claim to an Israeli defense contractor by Arab hacking or hacktivist group. This is another claim, another similar example, another defense contractor. This is a screenshot from a hacker group of an antenna control system. This is a screenshot from the same hacker group of a more complex system involving several gateways. This is a screenshot of a NMS showing passwords of remote terminals. This is a screenshot of a ground system maintenance tool. So as you can see, space infrastructure can be hacked and will be hacked if it is not properly protected. So to address the topic of cybersecurity in space, I will be moderating today this outstanding panel of speakers from industry. Let me give a warm welcome to Thorsten Stremlau, Systems Principal Architect at NVIDIA, and representing today our sponsor, the Trusted Computing Group, a not-for-profit organization defining industry standards for interoperable secure computing platforms supportive of a hardware root of trust. Yasin Felk, head of the SATCOM business unit at CySec, cybersecurity company developing cutting-edge end-to-end encryption solutions for SATCOM and for satellite command and control, among other products. Will Match, CTO at Speedcast, one of the leading teleport operators worldwide, and Jeff Flora, Chief Cybersecurity Architect at Kratos, one of the leading integrators and providers of satellite ground segment solutions worldwide. Thank you so much for being here today. So let's now jump into the first topic that I introduced, so the threat landscape. So we've seen some evidence before in my short introduction, but let's discuss here more in depth why cybersecurity is now a board-level issue. Torsten, the first question goes to you. What has changed in the threat landscape that makes trusted hardware and platform integrity more important now?
Thank you, Cesar. That's a really, really good question. And I really, really love the introductory slides because I think you set the stage really, really nicely with that. So, I mean, nothing's really changed. Let me be very, very clear. Satellite communications is still, as you mentioned, a very, very critical part of our infrastructure today. So the threat and the fact that hackers want to attack it has pretty much existed since the very beginning. The evolution of hackers and the evolution of their approach has changed significantly, though, and that I think is the main thing. In the past, the compilers that were used and simply software development skills and development skills around security and software had a lot of gaps, right? And so, but I guess fortunately, the age of internet has made it very, very easy to teach people and to learn about these gaps. And so software has become more and more secure over, well, within reason, it's become more and more secure. And so as the thing is, as you're now, and I'll use the analogy of a house, as you're now protecting your house and you're putting locks on your doors and you're protecting your windows against intrusion, where do the hackers going to go? They're going to go in through the basement, right? And the basement in this particular case is hardware. They're going to try to find bugs. They're going to try to find entry points at hardware level, and we're seeing a vast increase in those kinds of hardware attacks because once you're in at the base, you can then basically infect everything that's above it. And so this is what makes implementing trusted hardware and something that protects that base, that also protects the entry into your basement, I'll call it that, much more important. And that's why platform integrity is so important now more than ever before. And then lastly is using that platform trust, right? Using the hardware trust in order to, basically provide attestation, right? To be able to say is, yes, I am actually talking to the hardware that I'm meant to be talking to and not something else. So yes, that's the evolution. It's always been there, but it's gotten a lot more sophisticated, as you also said in your slides.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so hardware is at the basement of trust. That's very clear. We will touch upon that a little bit later. Thank you, Torsten. Yassine, next question goes to you. For you, which cyber threats are the most relevant to SATCOM operators today? Is it disruption, interception, spoofing, supply chain compromise, something else?
Thank you, Cesar, for the question and insightful introduction. I think that as of now, let's say it has been well documented, as you mentioned, on the cyber risk and let's say the cyber attacks happening on the SATCOM side. And what we've seen during this last year is that unfortunately many SATCOM deployments, they still rely on, let's say, on legacy DVB type of transmission without payload encryption, which makes basically the traffic trivially capturable and which is pointing to the right orbital slot. So this is one aspect. On the second side, what we've seen, and this what happened during the let's say all the conflicts that we've seen rising is that spoofing and jamming of control signals, particularly on geo uplinks and let's say GPS dependent LEO terminals, they have moved from let's say nation only capabilities to something very much more accessible. And this is as well very well documented. This is since the conflict we have seen rising in the last months. The third aspect I think we have seen, and this has been really highlighted in different conferences, is the supply chain compromise, which is underestimated. You have a lot of, let's say, third parties, vendors that bring firmwares on one side or the others for ground segments, and which makes it very attractive to attack this part of the value chain. And one aspect that will come for commercial also satellites is telecommand injection. You know, when we talk about, let's say, telecommand and telemetry, which is one of the rising aspects regarding, let's say, satellite and payload, which will cause irreversible damage on missions, but also on capabilities that are brought by operators. So this is in a nutshell, let's say, the four aspects that we've been involved in, and let's see that we see rising over these last months.
Okay, thank you so much, Yassine. So some legacy standards not properly implementing security measures, supply chain, spoofing, jamming, telecommand injection. Okay, we will touch upon some of these topics also later on. Now, Will, I would like to get your opinion from an operator's perspective. So what kind of incidents are more difficult to detect early?
Yeah, I think it kind of ties everything together well here. First, let me say thank you for having us all here, and I think the opening was fantastic as well. But I think Thorsten and Yassine hit on some very important points with it, and it builds from where I was going to take it as well. I think there's two major sides to this. One is securing the core infrastructure itself, and then the touch points where it lands at the edges that becomes the next best target. When you look at the satellites, they're really built like a utility these days. They're very challenging if you wanted to try to hack into them, but the edges are much more available. And I think when you look at how those incidents start at the edge is how they become very challenging to detect. Like the ones that you showed, they can be hard to find. And Thorstein's explanation on the hardware, it's a great example. A few years ago, you might remember the Log4j instance where, there was this little core piece of software that was on everything, UPS power strips that you had Ethernet converters on, you could hack into those things and start to turn things off at various locations. And similarly, on the remote side, in the historic customer base, they didn't always modernize their switches or things like that because they didn't really have a need. Most of it was very protected from the edge, where you firewall with the shore side before you transmit your data across. But now that you've moved the public IP to the remote side, you really need to be modernizing your hardware and keeping your software up to date and using these trusted suppliers because these make very easy entry points. I think any basic cyber is remiss without noting, your easiest target is the people. And when you get to the people on the remote edge who sit on a ship for days and days and days, and they just want to talk to home, they'll find any way that they can do it. And they can often click on just about anything. And those tend to be the easiest paths for attackers, but almost the hardest to detect because they're working through so many different routes. They can do a phishing campaign or a spear phishing campaign and get malware on a laptop and then invade a network through that path. And it's very hard to see those things. So we have to remember that, the trusted computing aspect of it, or putting a firewall at the edge, or adding security profiles on a place where you may not have ever needed them before. You need to do that now, and you have to look at that infrastructure because the world has changed. It's modernized with this IP at the edge is a great example, or where we have these touch points. And your hack examples show exactly that. Something as simple as a power strip can be a problem if you don't keep it up to date or you don't modernize that infrastructure.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Will. So attacking the edge seems to be easier than attacking the core, and then moving laterally, exploiting social engineering, and modernizing software, hardware, keeping it up to date seem to be key aspects. Well, thank you so much, Will. Let's jump now into secure by design. So about how to bring security to the core of the space systems architectures. And this will also help us understand some of the topics that will follow later on. So Jeff, coming to you now, what unique cybersecurity challenges emerge when securing ground infrastructure end to end? So from remote distant teleport, ground networks to centralized operation centers.
Thank you, Cesar, for the question, and I appreciate the intro as well. So cybersecurity has a lot of challenges, but with SATCOM or satellite communications infrastructures, it's one of the most challenging environments. So these systems tend to be global, many remote sites. Some of them are cloud-centric, some are within data centers. They tend to have a centralized management through like network operations center. Some of them have critical systems like space vehicle control. And then the equipment at some of these remote sites tends to be kind of specialized equipment dedicated just for satellite communications. We're talking like antenna control units, dehydrators, digitizers, circuit routing switches, modems. So it's a wide range of equipment with just different needs to secure that equipment. So cybersecurity professionals must be enablers, and they must find a path to yes. So that is to say that they need to be able to mitigate risks, but they also need to not impede operations. And so this means cybersecurity professionals must be very familiar with the system. They need to know the subsystems, the equipment. They need to understand how operations works as well as the business objectives. And so they have to become a partner in that relationship to ensure to help secure the system.
That's a very interesting angle there because, as all of us know, satellite equipment can be very specialized, and especially legacy equipment. So it's difficult to ask a cybersecurity specialist that comes, let's say, from a more generic IT background to look into very, very specific kind of SATCOM modems and NMS systems and whatnot. So that's a very interesting angle there. Thank you so much, Jeff. Now, Torsten, what does secure by design mean when trust must extend from silicon to system software? You're on mute, Torsten.
It's a very, very broad question. I know. I noticed that as I started speaking. But I think Will and Jeff both, kind of preface this very, very well. Hardware at its core is much, much harder, obviously, to change, especially when it's up in space. And by the way, even let's say ground equipment, right? The ground equipment has life cycles of 10, 15 years, right? And so one of the things that's really, really important is that, as I said, that the capability to have a hardware root of trust on the platform is something that's important, and I'll talk a little bit about the capabilities of it a little bit later, but making sure that you have a root of trust. And then there's another thing, obviously, that we're seeing is making sure that you build in enough crypto agility and enough agility into the hardware, as we just said, is, in order to be able to accommodate architecture changes and also just, changes and shifts in focus from the industry around software-defined networking, and other things like it. And so that's one of the things that I haven't seen a lot of is making sure that long-lived hardware implements that type of agility, implements a root of trust, and then, by the way, is able to interact with the software at a higher level in order to provide trust. Those I think are the most important things. So really making sure that the hardware and the system software can interact properly with one another, and the hardware is adaptable enough to be able to accommodate future changes.
Okay. So crypto agility understood as the capability for cryptographic equipment to upgrade algorithms later on in the middle of their life cycles, right? Especially important when it comes to satellite crypto equipment that you cannot easily change.
Exactly.
When it's already Thank you, Torsten. So we will touch upon a bit later on trusted computing and hardware root of trust. So let's park that topic for a moment. So now I'm turning back to Will and keep talking about, let's say, secure by design. So how do you embed security into live services without slowing deployment or harming availability of ongoing operations?
Yeah, I don't know how to respond to this question without a shameless plug for our Sigma product, unfortunately. So it's just something we believe in and it works really well. So I'm going to apologize ahead of time, but we do believe in it, and I think it's the right way to do it. I think, as Thorstein mentioned, you have to have that ability to upgrade, that ability to kind of change dynamically as you go through it. So going to a generalized compute stack and then starting to look at containers and VMs and how you are able to build those over time so that you get away from this very bespoke hardware, like you said, Cesar, on SATCOMs, is really one of those first key enablers that you need.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing that we see, when you're looking at this design, is how fast the industry is moving right now. 10 years ago, I've been here long enough, you can't maybe see the gray hairs, but they're there. 10 years ago, changing a satellite service was a really big deal, right? You were taking a major outage for a customer, you had a day's downtime, you went through all kinds of designs to make sure that they were going to be happy with it in the day. But now you can't do that. Right now, we're adding new designs almost every day to a customer site, and it needs to be seamless on how it does that, and it needs to be secure. So this is where SD-WAN has really kind of come into its own these days. You can have your base service running, and then you can add, Amazon Leo on top of whatever other connections that you have as it goes through, and you can gradually work your way into it. I'm going to let internet traffic in, and then I'm going to try my corporate traffic. Oh, that didn't quite work. I'm going to pull it back out, and you can adjust all of this on the fly on that base compute environment. So it really adds some flexibility to be able to help modernize that infrastructure. Then, like I said in the previous one, trying to run everything you can through a firewall or through this control base is really important. We've seen where it's becoming so accessible these days that let's say I go onto a cruise ship. We saw a couple of this happen where the passengers bring their own terminals. Well, we see the same thing on enterprise systems where the employees can buy their own satellite system and be connected offshore. And then their laptop is connected to their own public internet and is connected to the corporate network. So now you just bridge those two networks at the same time. So how you stop that or how you police that is really important on how you set up that initial design and structure to do that, because you will start seeing these joints that are happening today, and there are paths that go through it. So I think the design is really important. And I think all of the points that we've mentioned here, how do you modernize it? How do you use a trusted source? How do you make sure you can update it and move things together and add in seamlessly while maintaining that security is really important in that base design.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, software-defined architectures intersecting with hardware root of trust seem to be the kind of answer to secured by design architectures. Thank you, Will. I take the opportunity to remind the audience about the possibility to raise questions using the Q&A option. Please do so. So no need to wait until the end. Just feel free, and we will then select the questions as we go. Let's now jump to Torsten's favorite topic, but I will not only address Torsten on this part of the panel. So trusted computing and hardware root of trust. So the hardware fabric, the basement, the foundations, right? For the verifiable trust of all the software and all the let's say interfaces that will be built up on that basis. So, Torsten, what hardware root of trust capabilities are, in your opinion, most valuable when thinking about space and ground systems?
There are many, obviously, but I think I can boil it down to three capabilities that are probably going to be the most important. Protect, right? So the ability to be able to verify, signatures before an update, the ability to block, unauthorized firmware updates, the ability to, also protect against any, unattested communications attempts, right? So to be able to try to, by the way, I know that this is really hard, but, be able to avoid connecting up to an untrusted system, as Will said, is that bridged network, right, where there is something behind something else that's now connected up to the thing, is being able to really protect is number one.
Mhm.
Detect is the second
Mhm.
one, which is basically a continuous monitoring of the platform at both hardware and software level, to check to see if there are any I guess unauthorized changes that have happened to it, right? And to be able to detect. Now, by the way, that is also really, really hard to do and requires a lot of thinking and also a lot of architecture to be put in place. And then the last one is to be able to recover, right? So protect, detect, and recover. And the recovery part is, how do I keep track of let's say, a known good state, or how am I able to recover once I detect that the system has been compromised in some way? It might be a manual intervention. It might be just a notification to the operator that says something's wrong here, you got to fix it. Or it may also be something that's fully autonomous. And so those are all of the different different things that are really important around hardware root of trust capabilities.
Okay, so protect, detect, recover. Some of the key functions of the NIST cybersecurity framework, for sure.
Exactly.
Why reinventing the wheel? I mean, when the wheel is properly done,
Yep.
Of course. So thanks, Torsten. Yassine, Torsten touch upon attestation. So how relevant are attestation and trusted execution in software-based crypto deployments?
Yeah, I think that these are very key topics. So just for the background, at SciSec, we come from the confidential computing, let's say, field, and we apply these technologies, let's say, to space and satellite environments. And this is where basically, as well, it was mentioned practically by Torsten, and we fully concur on that. It's that as of today, attestation and trusted execution, these are not only optional, let's say, for software-based crypto. It's really the foundation of the rest of security models where all the platforms rest on. And this is even more highlighted when you look at, let's say, software crypto libraries that are running on unattested hosts, which provides no assurance that the key material has not been extracted or that the binaries has not been tampered with, or that the execution environment has not been compromised and that there is no pivoting into different environments. These are the topics that we have been tackling, let's say, with two aspects. The first one at the ground segment, where you can have such a hardware root of trust provided by different materials. And basically, it enables the operator to verify the security of the environment on which let's say, its application are running and are executed, and that also the software are properly signed. And on all the challenge remains on the flying part, let's say the onboard part, where it's still we see from our perspective some, let's say, consumer version of TPMs flying to bring TPMs, let's say, on the satellite. But still, there is a lot of work to be done there to secure, with all the threats that we've seen emerging based on conflicts, based on the dual use of satellites and so on and so forth, where software implementation on FPGAs are relevant for sure, but not sufficient at all. And in this context, attestation matters a lot on the key lifecycle management, on the zero trust aspect, given that you have multiple providers, and on the integrity of the system.
Yeah, I guess also on the spacecraft side is hard, let's say, to find a variety of chips because well, either you go for consumer grade, let's say, components, but if you really need to stick to rad hard components, it is much more difficult to find, let's say, available chips or chipsets out there in the market with implementing hardware root of trust. Well, thank you, Yassine. I'm turning now to Jeff. So how, from your perspective, how do hardware trust anchors change your threat model and the incident response strategy? Let's say going into more, let's say, operational perspective.
So hardware trust anchors are, cryptographic ties from the hardware to the software. That's a cornerstone to cybersecurity. And so that allows you, the systems that are using things like TPM or trusted platform module or data at rest encryption that leverages a hardware trust anchor, gives you a way to attest, to the identity and the integrity of that system. So if you're looking from like an instant response, if something's triggered a tamper, some kind of indication of tamper, then that clearly is going to set off your instant response, and that needs to be taken very seriously. Now, the compute devices do this much better. So when you're looking at like the threat model, I always think, and we've come to this a couple of times, but all the specialized SATCOM equipment that doesn't leverage hardware trust anchors, and it's somewhat unusual because these are smaller vendors, kind of niche equipment, and so I think Torsten mentioned preventing unauthorized firmware updates. So I would argue, a lot of this equipment doesn't need to be able to communicate to the outside world. And what can we do to mitigate that risk? Because that's a much bigger threat.
Right. So indication of tamper and any, let's say, indication of compromise coming from hardware trust anchor has to be treated seriously and with high priority. Thank you, Jeff, for that. We've received some questions from the audience. I would like to address some of them now. Some of them I will park them for later on as they're more relevant to other topics. The first one is from my old friend Tarcisio Lopez. What is the honest answer when asking about detecting capabilities? Is the SATCOM world able to detect intrusion attempts and loss of system integrity? Does this detection happen at integrity, network, endpoint, or application level? Who would like to take this question?
I'll take a stab at it, Cesar, just to begin with.
Okay, thank you.
It varies, right? I mean, the honest answer is you can if you get lucky, but sometimes things can get on and they kind of disappear. So it depends on the attack and what it is. As an example, you can see malware loaded into a machine. The malware can sit in the machine and do nothing, right? It doesn't communicate out, doesn't communicate in, no indicators of compromise, and it can sit there until somebody goes and just pings it when they're ready to turn it on. So you have both sides of the spectrum. A lot of things can be detected, but there are things that cannot be detected. So, I always tend to play it from a perspective of just consider it's compromised and how do you deal with it. And I think it kind of plays into a couple of the upcoming questions as you go through with it. But, with AI lately, identifying those indicators of compromise or how you monitor that network traffic to look for the packets that shouldn't be there, has really been a game changer on both sides, right? It creates an attack vector using AI, but it also creates an analysis vector using AI. So you can do a little bit better, and the attackers are just right there as well. Like it's going to be a constant battle, no matter which way you do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Well, I hope this answered the question. Another question is from Patrick Gallo. And I think it's linked to the secure by design topic that we touched upon before. Hello, have large satellite constellations such as Amazon, LEO, SES, O3b, mPOWER, Starlink, etc., with many ground stations to support the bandwidth network seen a different type of threat profile than the typical larger multi-dish gateway sites that have long supported the industry? So maybe, I don't know, Jeff, Will, I think this would be more on your corners.
Yeah, and I'll touch on this a little bit on some of my thinking on these large satellite systems, they're just global mini remote sites. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yes, it's much more difficult. It's a different problem to solve. And one of the upcoming questions, I kind of touch on an approach, I think, that kind of helps put that in context a little bit.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Let's move on with the topics that I planned for today's session, and then we will address some of the questions from the audience more in detail. So we move now to SATCOM network security. So GSOA is the Global Satellite Operators Association. So SATCOM is really at the core of most of its members. Let's address here specific aspects about securing SATCOM systems and services. Yassine, you are the obvious person to start this part of the panel. So, what are the most common weaknesses in today's SATCOM network architectures?
Yeah, let's say that it's a very interesting question because we have been looking at different topologies or different type of deployments for the SATCOM network deployments. And let's say the common conclusion is that it's basically linked to the structural weakness that you have in the architectural assumption of the topology that has been built. Most SATCOM network, just to illustrate it, they are monitoring RF layer, stopping on this aspect, detecting jamming or signal degradation to enable, let's say, a proper signal transmission. But they do not, let's say, take this up to the visibility into encrypted payload anomalies, into lateral movements, or in the OSI layer that are above, and the IP layer that are above the modem sometimes. So these are the let's say one of the weaknesses that we have been seeing at the moment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so some of the most well-known attacks have, let's say, have used lateral movements, right? From, for example, edge remote terminals and things like that. So I would like, yeah, please go ahead.
No. It's exactly that. It starts from a misconfiguration, which becomes let's say a door to perform an attack, and then to pivot to all the network and get access to and enable intrusion and all the challenge is to be able to detect and prevent this kind of weaknesses into the SATCOM network and prevent this kind of attacks. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. So now moving to Jeff. Thank you, Yassine. So from, let's say, a systems integrator perspective, what architectural approaches can strengthen the security of SATCOM infrastructure across both space and ground segments, especially in commercial components and interconnected networks that can expand the attack surface, as we've seen before?
And so this goes into a little bit of the question that the gentleman asked by the Q&A. So I'm going to give a mental model for the audience. There's something called the cybersecurity onion model. Now, that doesn't mean that cybersecurity needs to make anybody cry, but
it does sometimes.
It's a way to break down things and apply kind of what we would call defense in depth. So, and this is also how an attacker would look at an infrastructure. And so, rather than thinking like of a SATCOM system as just one big onion, if you will, think of it as all the different subcomponents, remote sites, your network operations center. Think of all of those as individual onions. And so, from there, you can kind of look at, the outside layer, so physical security. And I'm not going to go too much into that. I think generally people have a pretty good idea of physical security. Everybody has to swipe a badge. But then you start going into the perimeter security. And so this is what's protecting your SATCOM network from the outside world or the internet. And so this is going to be where your firewalls, intrusion detection, and so this is where you want to really limit not only ingress, but also egress. I think sometimes egress is overlooked a lot. From there, you have network. And so this is where your segmentation is. And so this is where you can help further isolate and help prevent some of those lateral attacks. And this is where you can also put a lot of effort into your port protocols and services, or PPSM, so and then once we go from there, you kind of get to the endpoints. And so the endpoints for compute platforms, there's really effective ways to monitor those, and especially the more advanced ones like virtual network servers, virtual systems that you have a lot of freedom to do endpoints and monitor those really effectively. And that's kind of where you're going to prevent a lot of the malware. And then from there, you kind of go to least privilege. And so this is like role-based access, zero trust. And so it's not only who, but also what needs access across your network. So you can't have service accounts that have free range over everything on your network. Same thing like you wouldn't have a user that has free range over everything. And then from there, you get into the data. So that's the core. And so this is where the hardware trust anchors come in, where we have data at rest and backups. And so each one of those layers can have some kind of vulnerability, but it's helped mitigated by the surrounding layers. And so when you have large global infrastructures, if you look at each one of these components as that, and then you start connecting the dots between, you can help mitigate a lot of the risk and kind of understand the vulnerabilities.
Right. So layer defense in depth makes a lot of sense. It's actually nothing new. I've been there for a long time.
Of course.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jeff. So I'm going to move to the next topic, and I will address also there some questions from the audience. Because they're somehow related to some operational aspects, which is our next topic, but it also touch upon some of the topics that we've discussed before. So operational resilience. It's about how to operationalize security on space systems that are running, and how let's say, keeping services running under stress and under attack situations. So, Will, turning to you, obviously, since you are coming from let's say, a teleport operator company, what does resilience mean in practice for a global operator that must remain uptime?
Yeah, I think if you could sum it up to one thing, resilience means multiple. But to kind of address the question that you were referring to, multiple also means redundancy and high availability, but that's not the same as multiple in the terms of cyber. When you look at a teleport as an example, you have multiple amps, and they switch over between amps if you have a failure, and that's how you can get a high availability. Same with your switches and your routers. But if you get hacked, it doesn't matter how many amplifiers you have, right? All of them were exposed to that one. So cybersecurity redundancy is different than physical high availability redundancy. You could have two switches, but if that network is hacked, it's going to be across both switches, regardless of whichever one fails. So you have to think about it in multiple, not just from a hardware perspective, but in a network perspective. Segment your networks out as best as you can. If you have an internet-only network, make an internet-only network. If you have a management network, make it a completely separate network and control what goes in and out of that network so that you don't lose it. Make multiple management networks. So if something goes wrong in this one, you still have access to another one. Make sure you have multiple paths of communication, right? This is where SD-WAN really helps, where you have Starlink, and then you could have Leo or Iridium or anybody else, so that if one of those paths gets compromised on your systems, you still have access into other ones so that you can actively work on it or exclude it or pair off what needs to be paired off and cleaned up to get everything back up and running as it is. So you have to think from a multiple high availability perspective, but not from what you're traditionally used to seeing. It's not about multiple machines necessarily, but it is about how do you protect and control those machines with the networks that touch them or the software that touches them, and then how do you keep them up to date, modernized, and latest, and everything else that goes along with it. I'd also add multiple credentials.
Mhm.
One set of credentials gets compromised, even MFA, and they can get to everything with that set of credentials, that's a problem. So you should always consider multiple sets of credentials in your layered approach as you go through it. Jeff's completely right. These onions, there's multiple onions, but even within those onions, you should be creating even more layers that go along with it so that if something is compromised, it doesn't get to the whole, it doesn't get to everything.
Right. Actually, your answer pretty much addresses already one of the questions from the audience, from Victor Chavez. What is the relationship between redundancy, high availability, and cyber resilience in satellite operations? I think it's very much in line with what you have already covered, Wilt. So I will take that one, unless anybody wants to mention anything on that regard. Good. So, Jeff, I'm turning back to you again. So, thinking about graceful degradation and ensuring the service. So, how do you design for this graceful degradation when knowing that cyber defense, even under this onion layer approach, defense in depth is not always perfect?
Yeah, and it's good to acknowledge that cybersecurity defense is never going to be perfect, and so that's the beautiful thing about this layered approach. That the more effectively each of these layers is architected and designed, it protects everything around it. But that also means that cybersecurity professionals, we have to be vigilant. There's never really a good enough. You always kind of have to continually work and put effort into finding these vulnerabilities. So this means actively kind of regular vulnerability scans, regular pen testing, and also encouraging operators to participate in. Sometimes operators will notice that there's something that's maybe not as configured correctly, or it's not as secure as it should be. And so working with the systems engineers and everything, and making sure that everybody has appropriate permissions to do their job, but also to make sure that we have that we're proactively, constantly refining each of these layers.
Right. Thank you, Jeff. So that makes a lot of sense. Yassine, I would like you to answer related to SATCOM systems again, in terms of resilience requirements. So, what would be those requirements? Let's say from the start for SATCOM systems, thinking about operational resilience.
Yes, I think that there are, just like on the topics that were addressed a few minutes ago, secure by design, there is resilience by design, where when you have multiple layers in terms of operational functionality, anything that, let's say, any resilience requirements that is retrofitted after deployment is consistently more expensive and less effective than what you should do from start. And so I think the non-negotiable aspects have been addressed by Will on one side, which is the path diversity for the connectivity, because you always have a risk of, let's say, disconnection, and you can rely on multiple orbital slots, which provides to the end user, let's say, the capability. On the other side, you need there is a need to implement all the failover capabilities with a latency that is acceptable by the end user, so that the communication is not disrupted, and most of all the application, because most of the time you have multiple type of application running at the same time, whether real-time, non-real-time, a huge set of data to be transferred, and so on and so forth. So you cannot, let's say, afford having tunneling systems to be made with multiple handshakes and taking a few minutes to reinstantiate, let's say, connectivity, most of all when you talk about critical communication. So resilience, yes, it's path diversity, let's say automatic failover, and what we said as well about security, all the encryption mechanism and let's say the proxies, the key management, the nodes, the edge systems that you need to take care about to enable secure communication over SATCOM networks. So all of this brings the resilience as a key topic, let's say on top of security. So this is from what I can see.
So path diversity, redundancy, multiple instances, but still remain vigilant for new vulnerabilities, do vulnerability scanning, pen testing. I think these are the key takeaways from this part of the discussion. So let's move on now to supply chain security. So, well, we all know space infrastructure, whether it is orbiting or on ground, it is the result of integrating bits and pieces from many different sources, both on the hardware and software side. So the bills of materials can be extremely large and complex. So let's now talk about how to ensure the security across the supply chain. And I will also bring one of the questions from the audience here. The person didn't identify, so it's an anonymous question. It reads, with so many systems and technologies depending on or using open source packages and software, what are your thoughts on mitigating certain countries injecting malicious content into the supply chain? I will address this question now to Torsten, if you don't mind, and maybe if you want to, let's say, touch upon hardware provenance and root of trust. Please go ahead.
Well, I guess so. Yeah, this is actually one of the biggest problems in that supply chain. And remember, it's not just the supplier that's supplying you, but it's also the supplier that's supplying your supplier, right? So that layer gets really, really complicated. We'll get back to that onion inside of an onion model that we were talking about earlier. So there are a couple of things, obviously, and a couple of developments in the industry that have changed and that have really allowed us to do a lot more in this. So number one is open source software. The good thing about it is it's open source, so you can actually inspect it, you can look at it, and you should, right? You should not just simply be blindly integrating something and so do use tools in order to inspect your code for vulnerabilities and anything else like that. That would be number one. But from a supply chains perspective, a completely different aspect. We have a software bill of materials, right? SBOM. That is, and so everybody should be requesting an SBOM for any kind of software that they're integrating into their platforms. I know it'll get complicated very, very quickly. But that allows you to very, very quickly figure out do I have Log4j in my environment? And by the way, we work with companies that took like months to figure out whether they were vulnerable to it or not, simply because they simply had no idea. So I guess number one is insist on an SBOM. We are increasingly seeing hardware bill of materials, right? So that's basically where you ask your suppliers or to provide you with a breakdown of which hardware components are on that, and then accompany that with a software bill of materials to also then say, okay, and this is the firmware that's on it, and these are all of the parts that make up all of that. And now, by the way, and I'm not selling a product, but I do want to highlight this so and the TCG Trusted Computing Group has defined, I guess, three fairly important standards in this area. Number one is a standard called RIM, Reference Integrity Manifest, which is basically a process and a specification that details how a company would provide that information to another company so that they can automatically and also through a computer system be able to measure and attest that. That's number one. We have another one, which is something that's called a platform certificate. And a platform certificate would basically be something that is then built once the platform is assembled. And by the way, it would be maintained as the platform gets updated, right? So a platform certificate is made up of all of these individual documentations. and then assigned and attested to that one particular platform. And then the last thing that I guess we have in this space would be, just simply our supply chain security work group that is actually defining how you best integrate that as an overall integration and link that into audit frameworks and compliance frameworks, right? So that you can then prove, okay, I have these hardware and software mitigations, and these address these compliance issues and these auditing requirements or these security requirements. So that was really, really complicated. But by the way, supply chain security is really, really complicated. I try to boil it down to the essentials. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Well, that is actually an extremely practical insight here, Torsten. So thank you so much. I will personally be going into the TCG website later on and have a look at those standards that you mentioned. And yeah, that's I think that will be also very helpful for a lot of people in the audience. I would like to also touch upon some practical steps, in this case from Jeff, when it comes to let's say mitigating supply chain risks and whatnot. So as SATCOM architectures rely broader on commercial supply, what would be for you practical steps that operators and manufacturers can take to mitigate these kind of risks?
So with this audience, especially being a global audience, of course we have European Union kind of GPA standards, ISO 27036 or 27036. And in the US, we have the TAA standards. So I'm going to make an assumption that a lot of organizations follow this, or at least attempt to follow this. But from when I think about this problem, I think about it from the kind of the engineering, kind of being a skeptic, is I want to trust but verify. And so I think when you do onboard new software or new equipment, taking time to validate, look for CVEs, run a few simple scans, and some of these vulnerability scanners there's open source variations of it. And what that allows you to do is just really understand what ports are open on the equipment, how does it function, and kind of where might the vulnerabilities be. And the vendors should be able to answer if there are any CVEs. So they should have some kind of process to notify you if there needs to be a critical firmware update or something like that. So, but definitely my takeaway would be just to trust and verify and to do your own due diligence.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Jeff. We are running out of time, so I'm going to jump to the last topic for today, which is probably one of the most awaited ones by many people in the audience. So it's about, let's say, future-looking technologies like AI, automation, and other technologies, especially when it comes to encryption, post-quantum cryptography. So in some cases, these technologies are already here. In some cases, they're more, let's say, future-oriented, but reality is we cannot ignore them. So I would like to start with you, Torsten, and please try to be short on your answer as much as possible. So how do AI platforms and trusted computing intersect in mission-critical environments?
Yeah, absolutely. And I provided a response to this several times already. AI is becoming a critical tool in everything to be able to analyze, and look at analyze software, and then also analyze infrastructure for vulnerabilities. And I just, there are many, many tools out there already. So thank you. I'm going to be short this time.
Thank you, Torsten. All right, I'll turn now to Will. So what security tasks are ready for automation, and which still need human judgment from your perspective?
So AI has been deployed on firewalls for some time. There's a number of major companies that use it, and there's a number of software companies that use it as well to look for these indicators of compromise or monitoring on a more consistent basis. So I'd say it's already been out in the industry and in use. We use it today. Just a reminder to everyone, AI is as effective as the data you give it. So the more accurate your databases can be, the more accurate your IOC databases, or how consistent data flows, or your software bombs, all of that is useful as it goes through and searches to see if an update was done that shouldn't be done. So AI can do a lot. It can do an absolute lot, but you've got to be able to feed it correctly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Jeff, so looking forward into the future, what efforts are you currently taking when it comes to post-quantum resilience? And do you expect any significant implementation and operational impact when post-quantum encryption is going to be implemented?
So I guess I'll skip to the, well, okay, so the good news is for post-quantum is a lot of our symmetrical encryption algorithms like AES 256. And so we should collectively always kind of adopt like an AES 256 for kind of trunk encryption. And so this is also encryption that goes over a lot of satellites, is considered quantum resistant. The bad news is all the asymmetric encryption algorithms. And so this is email encryption, digital signing, VPN when it initiates its connections, TLS, SSL, that those are susceptible. And so what this does is when there's a key exchange, if they're able to capture this key exchange, then you can potentially get the key to the symmetrical side. So that's, and there's not a lot of good answers, and we're not going to be the first ones to find out if a quantum attack has successfully been pulled off. And so it really puts us in a place where we need to kind of look at what mitigations we can do or compensating controls. And so this means like things like geofencing, which is again going to be hard for a global SATCOM network, but also I like the idea of using kind of multiple trunks, or we'll say encryption encapsulation, where you don't rely on just one layer of encryption. You have two layers of encryption to help. But there's no doubt that it's going to be disruptive. There's also some lattice framework or lattice algorithms, and these haven't hit the test of time. So. And they are proprietary. Many of them are proprietary. So it's hard to predict, but yeah, this will definitely impact us for the foreseeable future.
So looks like there's work to be done on that end. Good. So we're running out of time. I would love to let's say be able to continue talking to you guys. It's a very, very exciting topic, but I need to stop now. So thank you very much to all of you for your invaluable insights. Also to the audience for your questions and engagement. For the next GSOA webinar, so this will be on another very interesting topic, building the intelligent ground segment, reducing cost and complexity with RF over IP. So that would be on Thursday, the 25th of June at 3 p.m. UK time. Please go to the GSOA website and register for this upcoming session. It's really been a pleasure being here with all of you, exchanging ideas with all of you. And I really hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. So thank you so much to all of you, and goodbye.